Have you ever found yourself staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning? Not because you're anxious about tomorrow's meeting or replaying an embarrassing moment, but because you're genuinely questioning the very fabric of reality itself, wondering if the life you're living is the one you were meant to live, or if meaning is something we create rather than discover. And if you have, I need you to know something profound right now. You're not overthinking, you're not broken, and you're certainly not alone. Because what you're experiencing is evidence of a philosophical mind, a type of consciousness that refuses to accept surface-level answers and constantly probes deeper into the mysteries that most people have learned to ignore or suppress. And today we're going to explore 6 specific questions that, if you've ever genuinely asked yourself, reveal that you think more philosophically than the vast majority of people walking this planet. And I promise you, by the end of this exploration, you'll not only understand yourself better, but you'll feel validated in a way that perhaps you haven't felt before. Because philosophical thinking isn't a burden. It's a profound gift that allows you to experience life with a depth and richness that transforms ordinary existence into something meaningful and extraordinary. The first question that philosophically minded people ask themselves is this: what if the person I am right now isn't who I'm supposed to be? And this isn't about career choices or relationship status. It's something far more fundamental. It's a deep existential wondering about whether your authentic self has been buried under layers of societal expectations, childhood conditioning, and the countless small compromises you've made just to fit in and survive. And when you ask this question, you're engaging with what philosophers call the problem of authenticity, something that thinkers like Søren Kierkegaard and Jean-Paul Sartre spent their entire lives exploring, because the philosophically inclined mind recognizes that we're all born into a world with pre-existing scripts, roles, and expectations, and somewhere along the way, you started wondering if you've been performing a character rather than living as your genuine self. And this question haunts you not because you're ungrateful or perpetually dissatisfied, but because you possess an inner compass that constantly checks whether your external life aligns with your internal truth. And most people never even think to ask this question, because they've fully identified with their roles. They are their job title, they are their relationship status, they are their social position. But you've glimpsed behind the curtain and seen that identity is far more fluid and mysterious than society wants us to believe. And this capacity to question your own identity isn't a sign of confusion, it's a sign of philosophical depth. Because it means you understand that becoming who you truly are is not a destination, but an ongoing process of self-examination and honest reflection. The second question reveals itself in those quiet moments when you wonder, does anything I do actually matter in the grand scheme of things? And before you dismiss this as nihilistic or depressing, understand that this question is actually evidence of what philosophers call cosmic perspective taking, which is the ability to zoom out from your immediate circumstances and view your life against the backdrop of eternity, vast space, and the billions of humans who have lived and died before you. And when you ask whether your actions matter, you're not being self-pitying, you're engaging with one of the oldest philosophical questions in human history, the question of meaning and significance. And here's what's fascinating. The fact that you even ask this question demonstrates that meaning matters deeply to you, because if you were truly indifferent, you wouldn't bother questioning, you'd simply exist without reflection. But instead, you're wrestling with the paradox that while your individual life might be cosmically insignificant in terms of time and space, it's simultaneously the most significant thing in your subjective experience. And this tension, this ability to hold two contradictory truths at once, that you're both insignificant and profoundly important, is the hallmark of philosophical thinking, because it requires you to resist easy answers and comfortable illusions. And when you sit with this question long enough, you often arrive at a deeply personal philosophy about how to create meaning in a universe that doesn't hand it to you pre-packaged. And that journey, that struggle, is what gives your life a texture and depth that those who never question simply cannot access. Because they're living on autopilot while you're consciously authoring your existence. And that's not arrogance, that's awakening. The third question that philosophical minds grapple with is perhaps the most uncomfortable of all. What if everything I believe is wrong?
Option B.
And this isn't about second-guessing minor opinions or preferences.
Maybe.
This is about the terrifying and exhilarating possibility that your entire worldview, your political beliefs, your religious or spiritual framework, your understanding of right and wrong, might be fundamentally flawed or incomplete, and the willingness to even entertain this question requires immense intellectual courage, because our beliefs are not just abstract ideas. They're the foundation upon which we build our identity, our relationships, and our sense of security in an uncertain world. And most people protect their belief systems with the same ferocity that they'd protect their physical bodies. Because to question core beliefs feels like psychological death, but you've allowed yourself to peek into that abyss, to genuinely consider that you might be wrong about things you once held as absolute truths. And this is what philosophers call epistemic humility. The recognition that human knowledge is limited, perspective, dependent, and always subject to revision. And this doesn't make you wishy-washy or lacking in conviction. It actually makes you more intellectually honest than people who cling to certainty as a defense against the discomfort of not knowing. Because true wisdom, as Socrates famously understood, begins with recognizing the limits of your own knowledge. And when you question your beliefs, you're not betraying yourself, you're honoring the truth, seeking part of your nature that refuses to settle for comfortable lies or inherited dogmas. And this ongoing process of belief examination, of holding your convictions loosely enough to test them against new evidence and alternative perspectives, is what allows philosophical minds to evolve and grow throughout their entire lives, rather than calcifying into rigid patterns of thought that cannot adapt to new realities. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it creates uncertainty, but it also keeps you intellectually alive and genuinely curious about the world, rather than defensively closed off to anything that challenges your existing framework. The fourth question emerges when you find yourself wondering, why do I feel so disconnected from people even when I'm surrounded by them? And this isn't social anxiety or introversion necessarily. It's a deeper existential loneliness that comes from recognizing that every other person is living inside their own subjective reality that you can never fully access or understand. And when you feel this disconnection, you're brushing up against what philosophers call the problem of other minds. Because once you understand that everyone else is also fundamentally alone in their subjective experience, you develop a profound empathy for the human condition. You stop expecting others to perfectly understand you, and you stop judging yourself for not perfectly understanding them. And instead, you appreciate those moments of genuine connection as the precious and almost miraculous events that they are. Those rare instances when two separate consciousnesses briefly align and recognize each other across the void. And your philosophical mind doesn't make connection impossible. It actually makes authentic connection more meaningful, because you're not settling for superficial interaction. You're seeking those deeper moments of recognition that acknowledge both our separateness and our shared humanity. The fifth question that reveals philosophical thinking is this: what is the right way to live? And notice that's not what is the successful way to live or what is the comfortable way to live, but what is the right way, the ethical way, the way that honors something beyond mere survival or pleasure. And when you ask this question, you're engaging with ethics and moral philosophy. You're refusing to simply adopt the values that your culture or family handed you without examination, and instead you're taking personal responsibility for determining what kind of person you want to be, and what principles should guide your choices. And this question haunts philosophically minded people because unlike math problems, there's no objective answer key in the back of the book. You have to wrestle with competing values, with situations where good things conflict with other good things, with the gap between your ideals and your actual behavior. And this creates a productive tension that keeps you morally awake, constantly examining whether your actions align with your values, whether your values themselves are justified, and whether you're living with integrity or merely with convenience. And most people navigate ethics through simple rule following or cultural conformity. They do what's expected or what everyone else is doing, but you've taken on the much harder task of conscious moral reasoning, of asking not just what is legal or socially acceptable, but what is actually right. And this doesn't make you morally superior, it makes you morally serious. It means you've recognized that you're responsible for the impact of your existence on others and on the world. And that responsibility cannot be outsourced to authority figures or tradition. It requires your active participation and ongoing reflection. And yes, this makes life more complex, and sometimes more difficult, because ignorance and unreflective action are often more comfortable than conscious ethical living. But it also makes your life more meaningful, because you're not just existing, you're trying to exist well. And that distinction, that commitment to the examined life, is what separates philosophical thinking from mere thinking. The sixth and final question that philosophical minds ask themselves is perhaps the most profound. Is there something beyond what I can see and measure, or is physical reality all that exists? And this isn't necessarily about religion, though it can be. It's about the fundamental mystery of existence itself, why there is something rather than nothing. Whether consciousness is merely brain activity or something more, whether there's any transcendent dimension to reality, or whether we're just matter in motion following physical laws. And when you genuinely grapple with these questions, you're engaging with metaphysics, the branch of philosophy that asks, what is ultimately real? And philosophically, minded people can't help but wonder about these things, because they've noticed that material explanations, while useful and important, seem to leave something out. They don't fully capture the subjective experience of being alive, of feeling awe, of experiencing beauty, or love, or meaning. And so you find yourself in that strange position of being trying to understand consciousness, a small part of the universe, trying to comprehend the whole universe. And this creates a kind of permanent wonder, a recognition that existence itself is deeply strange and mysterious, no matter how much science explains the mechanisms. And this question doesn't require you to choose between reason and spirituality, between science and philosophy. In fact, the most philosophically sophisticated position is often to hold the question open, to resist premature closure, to remain in what the poet John Keats called negative capability, the capacity to exist in uncertainties and mysteries without irritably reaching after fact and reason, and your ability to sit with these ultimate questions without needing immediate answers, to tolerate ambiguity and mystery, is what gives your mind its philosophical character. Because you've recognized that some questions are worth living with rather than answering, that the questioning itself is a form of awakening, and that a life spent exploring these depths is richer and more fully human than a life spent avoiding them. And so if you've ever asked yourself these 6 questions, if you've wrestled with your identity, your significance, your beliefs, your connection to others, your ethics, and the ultimate nature of reality, then understand this: you're not overthinking, you're not wasting time, you're not being impractical or unnecessarily complicated. You're exercising the highest capacity of human consciousness, the ability to reflect on existence itself. And that makes you part of a tradition that stretches back thousands of years to the first humans who looked up at the stars and asked why. And while this philosophical bent might sometimes feel isolating or burdensome, it's actually your greatest gift, because it means you're living consciously, questioning deeply, and seeking truth rather than comfort. And in a world that often values distraction over reflection and certainty over wisdom, your philosophical mind is not just valuable, it's essential. So honor these questions, sit with them, let them guide you toward a more examined and intentional life. Because that's what it means to think philosophically, and that's what makes your inner world so much richer than you might have ever realized.